All right, this one's going to be fun, folks. Not that the rest of them aren't fun, but this one's going to really be fun. I have my friend Eddie Moody, who is the executive director of the National Association of Free Will Baptists. And I got to tell you, I love being able to say executive director. You were a secretary for so long, I didn't think you'd ever be promoted.
You helped me with that, you know.
I didn't know if I helped you or not. I was certainly a nuisance about it.
Yeah, that was good. You helped us make that work.
Well, I'm glad that y'all are able to come into the 21st century with that title. It is all good. Anyway, this is the Church Answers podcast. You have heard from Cheney and Associates, or at least about Cheney and Associates. And I just want to affirm my love, support, and encouragement for all of you to go to Cheney and Associates when you need any of your counting done. I mean, they're the accounting firm for the church, and they're the accounting firm for you. Got Jess Rayner, my son here. Obviously younger, obviously better looking, obviously more intelligent after you hear us for a little while. And then Eddie is here as well. Now, folks, here's the plan. We are going to talk about the National Association of Free Will Baptists. You'll hear me say Free Will Baptist as the short form more times than the full name. This is a denomination that you need to know about. No, it's not one of the largest denominations. It would be, if for those of you who know the Presbyterian world, it'd be a bit smaller than Presbyterian Church of America. So you got the National Association of Free Will Baptists, and then the Presbyterian Church of America is just a bit larger. We're not trying to talk about which one is biggest or not, but we're talking about really more which ones are more effective. And here's what I have concluded after knowing Eddie for 7, 8 years,
Something like that. Yeah.
The Free Will Baptists are just some of the most effective and I dare say exciting churches, because that's not your tradition, but it's some things are really changing. But Eddie, I haven't given you a chance to acknowledge that you're here, so welcome.
Okay, thanks for having me, and thanks, Jess, for being here, my friend. We appreciate everything Church Answers does for us as Free Will Baptists. You guys are great to us.
Well, you're great to us. I went on your site not too long ago, and right there on the home page was the Hope Initiative.
Yeah,
right
there you go.
And you also are very much one of our frequent customers with Know Your Church, our demographic and psychographic. So we have a great relationship. We appreciate what you're doing. This podcast is called a long form podcast in the sense it'll go at least around 50 minutes. And that's because we want to dig deeply into this subject. So, Jess, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we'll just kind of go back and forth a little bit. And Eddie is free flowing. Go any direction you want to go, and we'll follow you down that path.
All right, sounds good.
I'm excited to be here, just because of the three of us. I'm obviously the least knowledgeable about Free Will Baptist. And so I guess I feel like I'm kind of a listener who just happens to have a microphone and a camera, and I get to be here and be a part of the conversation and listen to the conversation. So hopefully for those who are listening today, just know that I'm with you as a listener today, and I'm excited to learn, and hopefully I'll represent the listeners well and be able to interject and ask some questions. So Dr. Moody, why don't you start with, who are the Free Will Baptists? You know, talk to me as if I've never heard about Free Will Baptists, and let's just start with an overview, and then we can kind of lay the foundation and go from there.
So we get that question, and I taught for, I was in secular universities for a good while, and they would always say, what in the world is a Free Will Baptist? And so first of all, it's all about free will. And so all through our history, our folks have believed that everybody was made in the image of God, but probably the free will part is that Jesus died for everyone. And so, Jess, if you think about it, it's a little bit like, or General Baptist. That would be Free Will Baptist. But we came to the name Free Will Baptist because people looked at us and kind of made fun of us a little bit, because we believe anybody could be saved. We do believe Jesus has to call people to himself, but we believe that a person could reject the Lord or accept the Lord. We also believe that every person really matters. And again, not that others don't believe that, but our goal has always been to do what we can to kind of reach out to people with the gospel. And if you think about it, I don't know if your listeners are aware of maybe Free Will Baptist history, probably not, but they were really involved in the abolitionist movement there was not all that long ago, the PBS Antique Roadshow had a book on the 100-year anniversary of Free Will Baptist up in New England. And inside that book, there was a little letter from Frederick Douglass. And he said when he was freed from slavery, the folks that were really most welcoming to him were the Free Will Baptists. And
Wow, I didn't know that, Eddie.
yeah, it's cool. And I think that book is worth like several, it's a lot of, I've got a lot of those books, but not that book with his letter in it. And so he goes on and talks about how they saw him not just, they were concerned about his soul is really what he says. Now he's older in his life at that point, and he's really sending a letter apologizing, I can't come to the meeting. Now, here's the other thing. In that same book, there's a letter from Harriet Beecher Stowe. And so everyone knows she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. So in that book, she says, or in this letter, she says, again, I can't come, but she says, hey, the Free Will Baptists were the ones that helped me after Uncle Tom's Cabin was written. She said, people said, oh, you're exaggerating or you're making the problem seem bigger than it really is. And your listeners may know about the key. So she used the resources from Free Will Baptist churches to write the book, The Key. And so we actually use that to say, this is why clerks need to do their job well, because that's what she's doing. She's using minutes and all, and she talks about what they did. So now, sadly, everybody wasn't anti-slavery. So that's in the North. In the South, it would be a little bit like Southern Baptists. There were even some pastors that were, you might say, some were slaveholders. And so you see those same problems that we've got, but they all still love people. And if you think about what happens today, we've got a ministry called Free Will Baptist Family Ministries that one of my friends, Jim McComas, is in charge of. And really, they work with people all the way from, they try to prevent abortion. They've got something called the Hope Center, all the way up into later in life, having with older people. That's the Free Will Baptist mindset. Every person is made in the image of God. Jesus died for everyone, and do everything you can to reach them. Two more things I'll say. We're Baptist, so you guys would know a lot about that. We've never believed in, for example, infant baptism. We are going to dunk them. Immersion, that's where we're at. And of course, autonomy. Church autonomy is such a big part of it. So I think just like Southern Baptist, we would have a lot of similarities there. A Free Will Baptist church can do things however they want. They choose their own pastor. They can even decide they don't want to be Free Will Baptist anymore. So the autonomy is a big part of it. So hopefully that's a good explanation in a nutshell, Jess, for that's who we are. We believe we try to reach everybody we can with the gospel, and that kind of permeates through everything that happens with us.
I want to do two things. First thing I want to do is have a brief theological discussion. You've addressed a lot of it. So you've addressed both polity and theology. And then I want to go to 2024 today and talk about some things that are going on. So here's what I'm noticing, Eddie, and you can confirm, deny, or say, Rainer, you're weird. But here's what I'm noticing. The Reform movement has gotten a lot of attention. And some of it's Presbyterian, some of it's Baptist, but there's been a lot of focus on the Reform movement. Quite frankly, some of the theology that has come out of the Reform movement has been good. I mean, it's been solid. Not that I am checking off everything in the Reform movement, but just simply to say they provided us some good theologians, but they've gotten a lot of attention lately. What I am noticing right now is Free Will Baptist and Global Methodist are two denominations that are getting attention. Somewhat in the Armenian side, you're similar, but then there are big differences because I think you're complementarian. Is that right? In the pastor role?
Yes, absolutely. So that's where we would be different than like Global Methodist. So, and there's you probably won't find a woman that is a pastor. You'll find women working in churches. So in that respect, it would be pretty similar to Southern Baptist. And just to kind of explain that a little bit, Tom, most of our people would probably refer to themselves as Reformed Arminian. So like
really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that would be like the works of Leroy Fourlines, Robert Pickrilly, Matt Pinson. So there's a lot of similarities with Reformed now, not predestination and and all of that. But the dedication to the Word of God, inerrancy, all of that would be there, the basics of the Christian faith and so forth. But yeah, you would see that. And you'd see that in a lot of our writings. So there's a good book. It's not just for Free Will Baptists, but it would be for anyone that wants to learn about Arminians by Matthew J. Pinson, called
All right,
40.
go on. So
Yeah,
sorry.
put that in there. 40 questions about Arminianism, and he'll sometimes differentiate like where we're at in other Arminian groups and so forth.
Well,
I'm sorry.
no, I was. You answered it. If I had just shut my mouth a minute, I would have gotten the answer without having to ask you again. So, one of the reasons that I have become Thom Rainer, Church Answers, have become friends with Free Will Baptists is we're aligned in many ways. Theologically, we're aligned. We'll have some differences, but we're aligned on most of them. And you, in your leadership, and you're not going to say it, but I will. I think part of the significance of what's going on with Free Will Baptist has been the leadership of Dr. Eddie Moody. And I know every church is autonomous, and I know they can do whatever they want to do, but they're following good leadership. You're not a bishop. Global Methodist would have that. You're a congregation, part of a congregation. But I want to hear your story for a minute. I want to hear how Eddie Moody came from North Carolina State as a professor to Nashville, Tennessee, where you're headquartered. And I also want to find out why you're headquartered in Nashville, because when I go to North Carolina, I see more Free Will Baptists, it seems like. It could be wrong.
Oh boy. Yeah, that's the truth. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit. So first of all, this morning I am at Bethel Free Will Baptist Church in Kinston, North Carolina. So this is my home church. This is where I grew up. Oh man, it's just a great place. Chris Truitt, who was one of our Beta Group Hope Initiative guys, is the pastor here. Good guy. So I've taken over his space. So anyway, he's been so gracious. So I was here. I grew up as a Free Will Baptist. Great pastor, David Paramore, who, by the way, was bivocational or co-vocational. So I went to Free Will Baptist Bible College, which is now Welch College in Nashville, Tennessee. So that's the thing. Then went to Middle Tennessee State and then went to NC State. So like my story it's an odd story, I was just a few feet from here once and David Paramore said to me, "Do you know what you want to do?" And I said, well, Psalm 37:4 says, "Delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart." And so sometimes I feel like God wants me to teach. Sometimes I feel like he wants me to preach. Sometimes I feel like he wants me to do both. And that's my story is kind of that. That's what happened. So I think, I went and got a degree in clinical psychology at Middle Tennessee State. So then I came back to North Carolina to go to NC State to get a doctorate degree there. And I was a professor, I was an administrator, working in prisons, juvenile prisons. And then I started pastoring a church in 2000. So if you had told me I'd be the executive secretary or executive director, I might not have really, I wouldn't have believed it or really known anything about this. This was never on my radar. So, I started writing the books on emotional first aid. And so that led me, even before I was a professor, to work with a lot of our churches. And that got me in our churches. It got me in the various state leadership part. And so, Tom, I was not a denominational leader. I was not any of those things.
That explains a lot.
Well, so I was not in denominational politics, if you will.
Yeah.
And so here, this explains this. I was nominated. I was the chair of a department at North Carolina Central University. And I was nominated to be on the Welch College board, and I was voted down twice. Twice I was.
Wow.
And I didn't ask for that, but that's what happened. And so somebody nominated me from the floor the third time. I wasn't there, or I would have said no. But they put me on the board. And so I don't know if that put me here or what. But long story short, one day I was at the Welch graduation. And a guy that was part of the political apparatus walks up to me and he says, "Hey, he's on the executive committee, which you know about that from Southern Baptist." And he said, "Hey, our Keith Burden is going to retire soon, and he did a great job. He's part of our story here as well." And he said he's going to retire, and you should really think about, would you be interested in being the executive secretary? And I don't know what I said to him, but I don't think I said I would be. But then I went and I sat through the graduation, and I'm thinking, that would be fun. But I'm like, but they're in Tennessee. I don't want to leave North Carolina. And then I started driving around the Hendersonville, Gallatin area, and I said, well, this wouldn't be a bad place to live, but I don't think my wife would ever leave North Carolina. And then we went to a wedding, and another executive committee member came up in front of my wife and said, Keith is going to retire. I wonder if you'd be interested in that. I don't remember what I said to him, but later we left the wedding and my wife said, that might not be a bad thing. I said, what? Mm-hmm. And she said, yeah. She said, so I had become the assistant or the associate dean, and the church was pretty demanding. The administration, it was a demanding thing, what I was doing at NCCU. I loved it. And she said, Eddie, this is not sustainable. Doing two jobs like this, it's just not sustainable. So, we had a family meeting, and the guys interviewed me, and I said, this is what I'd like to do if you elected me or whatever. And I did talk to a past executive secretary. His name is Melvin Worthington. We had breakfast, and I thought he would say, no, you don't need to do this. And basically after that meeting, I said, if they ask me to do it, I think I'll do it. So that was it, man. And
what year was that you came
that
aboard?
Was 2019. So September 1st, 2019. And I'll tell you, the Psalm 37:4 thing is true. Like, I'd never thought about it, but the more they talked to me about it, and then it just grew where all these people, kept talking about it. And I know during COVID, that's when I would have thought about, I sure wish I had done that. You know what I mean? So, and after getting into it, I don't know if we have a counseling program that we set up. We've done over, 1,300 sessions. We deal with 8 different helping professionals, but I'm an odd duck. So like, I have a license to practice psychology at the master's level, and then I've the PhDs in counselor education. So I'm also a licensed professional counselor. So I deal with psychiatrists, I deal with nurse practitioners, with our guys and their wives and families. This is crazy, but it helps to know those different licenses. So I still have to do continuing ed. So I look at it, and I was kind of prepared for what we're doing now. You mentioned the Know Your Community. So I used to do these evaluations and say, hey, like with prisoners, and say, this is what you need to do with him. This is the programs he needs and all that. It's crazy, and I know you wouldn't believe it, but like when we talk about Know Your Community, talk about the psychographics, because it's the same as a psychological. You do the demographics and you do the psychological assessment. It's the same process, and so it's just like 30 years ago doing psychological assessments. You're kind of doing that with the church. So no one would ever believe it, but and I wouldn't have believed it, but all those things kind of work to this, And I got to say, Tom, think about the guys. I mean, what in the world was wrong with them? I'd been voted down twice to be on the Welch board. They're the ones that convinced me to do this. The executive committee. There were 2 executive committee members, and I think there's only, 12 of them, or whatever. And so them coming at me, and that also is a good lesson when you've got somebody in your church that you think is skilled or prepared. It was not on my radar. I had never thought about this. And so them coming and talking to me, that helped. And the Lord, it kind of moved me to walk away. I was a tenured full professor, and that was a hard thing.
That could be a good life if that's all you do.
Yeah. And that was, I felt like, well, the Lord might just take my life or take my ability to reason, is because, but anyway, it's
Doctor
good.
Doctor Moody, I'm kind of
And
curious.
Jess, you can call me Eddie, as somebody else would say about himself when you call him Dr. Rayner, right?
I'm
That's right.
happy to if that's your wish. I'm happy to.
Yes.
I'm learning here. I'm learning your story. I'm
Yep.
learning how you got called into this role as someone who feels like maybe just a first time listener here. I'm kind of curious from a denomination. There's two things I have questions about. The first one's this: from a denominational perspective. You mentioned you're executive secretary, executive director. I'm kind of curious about your role from a denominational structure standpoint. You mentioned the churches are autonomous. You've mentioned you're doing, helping with some psychology. You got all this. So what does your role look like today, and how does that, if someone joined a Free Will Baptist church, like what kind of dots would connect you to them? I'm just kind of curious about that
Yeah.
that kind of
So
perspective.
most of them would not know me, so
Okay.
it's interesting now. It's different, it depends on how denominational they are. Like some of them be like, "Hey, do you know who that is?" No, no. So most of them wouldn't know. Some of them would be like they would know the picture from the resource of the magazines. We have a podcast called Better Together. So like that's a way, and I'll run into. I don't know. I'm in a lot of different places, and so like, where was I at? I was in Indiana. No, I was in Illinois like 2 weeks ago, and a guy came up, and he's clearly listening to the podcast. So that's our connection directly to the people, right?
Okay.
But we do have the state leaders. So like yesterday, somebody sent me something about a revitalization coach training, and I sent that out. That was you, Tom. And so I sent that out to the state leaders, and I said, "Hey, you guys, are you interested in that?" And so they're they have that. And then it's different even within those states. Some of the states are looser. We have a cooperative program. And so our states that are strongest there have this, they're in the best shape financially to help themselves, like that. Now back to the doctrine, Jess. The doctrine is all the way across. People would be the same. Now, the style is different. That's the key. So you walk into one church and there'd be maybe people holding, raising their hands. You walk into others and they think that people that raise their hands must be a super charismatic, but
Mm,
they're not raising their hands. You have different versions, different Bible versions. There would be more King James in certain parts. Different style, but the same substance. That's
okay.
the thing.
Okay.
I did not mention on doctrine. One of our distinctives is we believe in feet washing. However, you would go to some churches, and especially a new person may not really know about that, or they know a little bit about it, but that kind of gets to the servanthood. The servanthood stays. The other is different. Same thing on the signs. They may be Free Will Baptist. You may not know if it's a Southern Baptist or non-denominational church until you get the new member class. So that makes sense to you?
Yeah. So someone walks into a church, they're an autonomous church. They're going to have, I think you mentioned the word, kind of a different style, but under
Yes.
a theological umbrella. It sounds like those churches then make up a state convention,
Yes,
and
you're
then
right. Or
and then there's
district. Yeah,
okay, and then there's a national level as well, and you're on the national level. Is that correct?
correct. And so it truly is structured for pretty similar to the Southern Baptist,
Okay.
except you have like a president that's elected every year. Thank the Lord we don't do that. We have a moderator, okay, and so Tom, the moderator, I think is Tim York, right?
Yeah,
Now
yeah.
he has been the moderator for since the days of Moses, some would say. But
Yeah. Okay.
anyway, he was elected like yearly. Now the moderators serve like a 3-year term or whatever, and that kind of thing. So that would kind of be our equivalent to your president a little bit, maybe.
Okay. Okay.
Um, But anyway, it's kind of like that, Jess. But here's the thing: we really can't tell anyone what to do,
Hmm.
though a lot of the churches don't really understand that, or a lot of people don't really understand that. Where there's no bishop, but we can influence and we try to provide resources. That's really what we do,
So it
and
truly
and
is a
we think
a
it truly
cooperative
is,
denomination.
and they are truly autonomous. And I mean, we think that has helped us survive in some respects. In some respects, it's been hard for us, but in other respects, like with the whole storm, we just had our hurricanes. We're trying to tell, okay, this is where these people are, this is where those folks are, but they didn't call Nashville and say, hey, where do we need to go? They picked up chainsaws and they went. And that's the good thing about autonomy. They're rolling, and we're just trying to support them and help them, and funnel resources to them.
Well,
Jess, I know you got another question. I'm going to interrupt for just a moment.
okay.
Because I want to thank our sponsor again. We always need to remember Cheney and Associates. They're in California, but they can help you anywhere in the United States. All of their stuff is in the cloud. When I say stuff, I'm talking about their accounting software. I'm talking about all that they do. We recommend them because all that they do are churches. They have over 1,100 church clients growing rapidly. It's an organization that we are grateful for. It's an organization that they pay the bills for this particular podcast, and we're grateful for that. But we don't get a sponsor unless we are aligned in ministry, and they are very much on our page in terms of ministry to local churches. So just remember Cheney and Associates, and you can look at them in the show notes. You can just go to CheneyAssociates.com or maybe .org. You better look in the show notes. Well, let me get this right. CheneyAssociates.com. I needed to look in the show notes too. Couldn't remember which one. All right, Jess, back to you.
Yeah, I love your story and how God brought you to this role. It's so helpful to understand the denominational structure, cooperative churches, autonomous churches, how you're helping lead. One of the things you mentioned that was part of your story and how you got to this role is you mentioned some books. And so that tells me you've written some books. Is that right?
Yeah. So,
Can you tell us about those? I
yeah.
don't know them, so I want to know them.
All right. So Jess, someone did a podcast with me about, I think it was First Aid for Emotional Hurts. It was your dad. And so that's kind of like the overarching part. So that was kind of the first thing I did denominationally. I was writing Sunday school literature. And there's then booklets. So all of it's really about emotional health, mental health. So there's like one for depression, one for anxiety, one for veterans, a good one I like was for health, just regular physical health. So there's like, there's a kit. It's called and our listeners could go to nafwb.org/first aid, and the kit is there. And basically, the overall book, First Aid for Emotional Hurts, is what do I need to do to help people that are depressed or having substance use issues or having family issues. And so we try to equip the regular person at a church to help people through difficulties. And, I trained counselors for 24 years. So that was kind of trying to help regular people do that. There's a book called Surviving Culture, being in secular environments. How do you do that and survive? So those kinds of books, that's probably what got me on the map for this executive secretary / director thing. I would go to churches, I would go to their state meetings, and they would have me do like seminars on them and train them in this kind of stuff. And so that's kind of where it's at.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm gonna go check out this kit. That sounds like
check it out, buddy.
Needed resource for anybody in ministry.
Yeah.
Right. The timing of this is fortuitous or sovereign or just good.
Hey,
pick up
we
your
believe
theological.
God is sovereign. We believe He knows. He just gives us choices.
I do too, Eddie.
Yeah, I know it.
So I'm finishing a book. This is a self-promotion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always finishing a book. This one is called The Anxious Generation Goes to Church, based upon the book The Anxious Generation, at least foundational. But what happens after they get in church, and why should they be in church? That's the thesis behind it.
Yes.
The editor, the publisher liked it. Tyndale liked it, and hope so, because I signed a contract to do it, and they They said, however, we want you to add a chapter. I hated that. They wanted me to combine 3 into 1 and add 1. So the chapter that they wanted me to add was practical application as these Gen Zers and Gen Alphas come into the church and you begin to notice the problems that they have. Most pastors, lay people, don't know what to do. There's no triage. There's no sense of, do I need to send this person here? Is it serious or not? And guess whose book I'm using to do that portion?
You are the man. You are the man.
And as I'm writing it, I'm giving credit to you. I'm saying, this is coming from Dr. Eddie Moody, who has just been promoted from secretary to director, executive secretary to executive director of Free Will Baptist. So I wanted to inject that. We did do a podcast on it. We'll do a link to the podcast, and we'll do a link to that on the National Association of Free Will Baptist site as well.
That's great. Thank you
now,
for
Jess,
that.
Did I interrupt you again, Jess?
No, actually, that was you finished the answer to the question. So
it was helpful.
Again, as taking a first time listener perspective, there's some things you said that I was like, I want to know more about that. So no, that was the end. That was the end.
A little bit of practical application here, Eddie. First, just think about all of them. Talk to us about where you perceive the strengths of the denomination, or better, it's probably better to say the churches in the denomination, because without the churches, there is no denomination.
Yeah.
And some of the challenges that you see right now. I'm high on y'all. I know that you do a great job, but I know that you're made up of church members and pastors, so there has to be a few things wrong.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, hey, we work on unity, and our folks would tell you that we've got a long ways to go. And that's kind of where you're sitting. Oh, you just don't know. We're much better off than you know. So that's something we're always working on. I would say historically, a lot of our older timers might say that, we messed up, some in the past. And so, for example, I don't know, maybe 2022, we had our day of prayer, basically asking God to forgive us for shortfallings. So you would say in the past, that might have been a problem for us. I would say today it's more of a strength,
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think if you went around the denomination, people would say we're the best we've been, as far as things like that. So it was a weakness, maybe. Now I'd say it's more of a strength. And I'll just give a couple of examples for why I do see that as a strength. Like North American Ministries does these boot camps, and they've started going and doing them to various churches. And what we're seeing is lay people are coming, and they want to know how to do things. And it's been a good lesson for us. They started doing those for pastors, and now they're doing them for pastors and lay people. So now it's great. Pastors don't have to convince people to do things. They're kind of on board with it, right? That is a definite strength. A weakness is resources. So our good buddy Ryan Burge, you probably know this, has said that we are the most economically disadvantaged denomination, right? So, and if you tell our people that, they would say, no, that's not the case. But I just got off the phone just before we did this with the fellow in another state, and, they've raised $10,000 and they're sending it to the hurricanes. And let me tell you, to the people who've struggled with the hurricanes, now that's kind of, there are some people that just gave $10,000, but they will come together and they will give. But truly, I don't think our people have the same types of financial resources that maybe other folks have. But I do feel like they take what they've got and they use it well. So number two, a weakness is our financial situation. So overall last year, I think we had a little over $17 million given to the denomination. The most of that, 76% of that, was given to missions, international or North American ministries. So they're giving
not much left over.
There's not. That's the problem we've got, a little bit trying to get folks, hey, don't forget us. So we help you with the infrastructure and the counseling and the coaching and all the rest of it. Now, the other thing I'm going to say, a great strength is our youth. And, that's the CES data says that we're the third youngest and all of that.
That's unbelievable. Third
That is
youngest.
unbelievable. But we keep our kids. Now, the only thing, and I know I've talked to you about this, that we have is the study of the kids who participated in our program. So that's Truth and Peace, the D6 Family Ministries that Ron Hunter runs, is IM, International Missions, that Clint Morgan runs, and then like our college missions program. All of those folks that are now Gen Zs, and as adults, they still go to church, right? They go to church. They are ministering in churches, usually 3 or more ministries, and we're talking about 85%. And then most of them go to a Free Will Baptist church, and except when there's not one there. So still 75% go to a Free Will Baptist church. We don't have a church in New York City. We're the second most rural denomination, which is both a strength and weakness. So hopefully that kind of answers it a little bit. I got to talk about this. Our struggle, my number one struggle, is we have 209 churches that don't have pastors.
Wow.
And people may listen and they may think, I don't know how they sense that. That's a big deal for us. So
it's a big deal.
It's a big deal. It consumes, it's all good though. So we've started something called the Shepherding Initiative, which I don't know if you know Andy Addis, but he's a great Southern Baptist in Kansas. And he's done a lot of things working with churches that did not have pastors and basically gave us everything he's got, So we've developed something from what Andy gave us called the Shepherding Initiative. And that's something that Tim York runs for us. But we use that to provide resources for these churches that do not have pastors and to try to equip the laity. And I think that's going to help us, but that's been a big struggle for us too.
You might be on the front edge of the co-vocational movement without even trying, because you have those vacancies and you're looking to replace them, maybe internally, maybe within the community. So we'll see what happens there.
We're trying. Already half of our pastors would be co-vocational. So we're trying to teach that is not a bad thing, and I'll keep saying, hey, I was co-vocational, and I loved it. I got my retirement plan through the state of North Carolina, that's a good thing. So we're also trying to teach guys that are going off to college, think about stepping out. You're an engineer. Whoa, buddy, you can take care of yourself and not have to worry about the church,
There's the magnitude, I think, with the last two things, Eddie, that you mentioned. You said the phrase, we keep our kids.
Yes.
Which
yes.
is huge.
Yeah.
But then you just said a large, I don't know if you said majority of your pastors are co-vocational.
Yes.
Those two things typically never happen. At least and Dad, you might have some hard research with that. But pastors who are co-vocationals, I feel like typically have a hard time keeping their kids. So what is it about Free Will Baptist? Have you cracked the code? Like what is going on that you have a denomination of co-vocational pastors that are keeping their kids? That to me, that is a trajectory that can be absolutely massive for the American culture.
So here's the secret. That study that we did on Truth and Peace, that's what that leadership conference is called, College Missions Program and E-Team. The study of those young adults, right? These people that they participated in these programs years ago. Truthfully, I thought we were going to have people that stayed in church and people that left the church, and we're going to look and figure out what happened, and how they were different. So we're asking them questions. And so we basically say, we ask them how they chose their church. We ask them how they chose their church attendance pattern. And this is what we got, Jess. I have always attended church. I have always been part of the church. And so if you're part of a rural area, especially now I keep calling them kids, but they're young adults. Some of them are as old as 27 now. Okay. So what you're looking at, they're going back and they're saying, I was highly involved in my church. My parents or a grandparent or a neighbor, somebody always brought me to church. So that's a part of it. Number two, it was my church. They were working in the church. Now, the next thing we learned, it didn't matter if they did our programs for 1 year or 3 years. None of that mattered, which is interesting. So it was all set at home. And that goes back to D6 Family Ministries. We talk about it's not, just 1 hour a week. You work with your kids all through the year. I mean, all through the week, all day, when you get up, when you go to bed and all that. So that's been stressed for a long time, right? Through these 6 family ministries. So you've got that happening. And I do think the rural part helps us a little bit because we learned most of them, like 46% of them go to a Christian college. No. They go to a Free Will Baptist Christian college, and then we've got almost a majority goes to a Christian college. But it didn't matter if they went to Christian or they went to a secular, we kept them. And so I think it's because they were part of the church early on, and then they're part of the church after. So it's almost like these young adults were bragging. They weren't because it's anonymous, but they're like, hey, I do the AV, I do a D group, I do this in my church. And it's part of the Gen Z thing is being activist oriented. They feel it's their responsibility. And so the church leaders coming along and saying, you take the Facebook page and do that, or you go do this D group. That's what I think helped us keep our kids. So
ownership.
That's kind of convoluted, but that's it there.
So, Jess, Rainers are connected with Free Will Baptist, particularly your oldest brother and your dad. There are a number of ways. I just will talk to Eddie as we're talking to you about it. I started preaching in your chapel when the school was on the west side of town.
Oh, yes.
And several times, I think even when I was at Southern Seminary as a dean, y'all wanted me to come there. I'm thinking, y'all want someone from Southern? You do. And so I preached there. And maybe even after I went to Lifeway, I preached there. The school has moved, right?
It's moved to Gallatin. So that's where I live. And so, when I was pastoring in Clayton, I was real close to Southeastern Seminary.
That's
and
right.
We always had a seminary student that would, it's kind of the bivocational thing. Jackson Watts, by the way, he was the first guy we did this with. He went to seminary and he worked in our church simultaneously, right? So what you saw, anyway, Southeastern brought me over, and we won't start a war here, but they're like, why do all the Welch students go to Southern? And that's why. Because they're bringing the Southern people down. Now, Timothy Tennant is preaching in chapel this morning at Welch College, right? At Asbury, right? But they're bringing them down, but it's also because of Louisville. And if you remember, Southern Seminary had that satellite, in Nashville.
Right.
So that's
it was at Lifeway a good bit of the time.
Absolutely. And then there's a lot of the students that work there. But when I was over at Tippett's Chapel, which is where I was at in North Carolina, we started getting some more Welch students going to Southeastern Seminary. By the way, Welch students love New Orleans, right? So New Orleans, theologically, they just
right with them. Yeah.
They really line up. So they'll have our faculty go and,
I think your demographics line up better with New Orleans than the 6 seminaries we have.
They do. And then we don't have that many churches in Louisiana. So, when I was at Southeastern Seminary, they would say, Eddie, we got Free Will Baptist just like you in Louisiana. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Just like you.
All right. So that's the thing. And now we've got our own divinity school at Welch. So Welch has a divinity school. We've got a school and we've got Southeastern Free Will Baptist College in Wendell. And so it's undergrad, but now with Welch, they can send their undergrads, they can send them over and they'll do a master of ministry or whatever. And then we've got another school, which you've probably worked with a lot of our fellows out of Randall University, a lot of alumni at Randall. Oklahoma is strong for us. They've got strong givers. And I think part of it is the anchor of Randall. that's where we'll have the state meeting, and all that. So just some really good stuff. Good stuff.
Well, and also you invited me to speak at, I guess, your leadership conference like 3
That's
different
it.
times.
That's it. Yeah. So you did that. You got us on the right road. Jess, I know you don't believe that, but
I don't.
he came in and he came in during COVID and he risked his life. The health department would not allow us to have more than 152 people. I think we had 153. And he came in, he spoke, he did a good job.
Well, we love the connections with Free Will Baptist. I love the fact that we're connected with you, Eddie. This story has been incredible to me. Jess may be the novice in this and has not heard hardly any of it, but I haven't heard a lot of it. And now I'm thinking about all the people in Free Will Baptist I know. Ron, you mentioned him.
Yep.
I've written for him in the past, so
Yep.
I know that. Is it Stanley Bunch?
Yeah, Stanley. So Stanley is probably the person that got the executive secretary changed from executive director. So he is our Missouri leader.
All right.
So,
well, somebody got right with God and gave you a promotion away from being a secretary.
Yeah. And he's on my executive committee. So
There
he was
you go.
part of the group that hired me. Right.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
it. Jess, you got anything before we wrap this up?
Yeah, you started off. There's something at the very beginning, Eddie. You talked about the big thing about Free Will Baptist is everyone's made in the image of God, and
Yeah.
that idea of God wants to save everyone. And I feel like kind of through the course of this, you've kind of given us the heartbeat of Free Will Baptist. But if you could summarize it, Free Will Baptist, the heartbeat of who we are is blank. How would you describe that?
Loving God and loving people, Jess. I mean, really, and that's the thing. Wherever you go, you can find a lot of different styles, but they love God, and you will find they will love people. So they will embrace you and love you. Wherever you go. One of the things that's a big initiative with us right now is reaching international students, and so if you're within 10-minute drive of a university, let's reach those international students. Bring them in for Thanksgiving. Bring them in for over spring break. They have nowhere to go and all that. That's these people. They'll give you the shirt off their back. That's kind of the mentality. And so having somebody from China, doing Christmas with you, I can do that. And so they'll love on those people and work on them, and that's why I love them. I
love that. I share that heartbeat. Yeah. One of the prayers I pray often for my 3 kids is that they would love God and love others. That's the exact verbiage I use. And so I share your heartbeat with that. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks, buddy.
Eddie, it's been a joy to have you. And as usual, you have done a great job. And I want this word about Free Will Baptist to get out, not to honor a denomination, but to honor God's work through a denomination, and particularly through the Free Will Baptist churches that comprise the denomination. So thank you for this. And I'll just say thank you for all you've done to be the beta and everything else for the Hope Initiative, because y'all were among the first that helped us to get that going. And now it's going to well over 1,000 churches, and it just continues to make a difference for the kingdom. So thank you for that.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
It was. We have been talking to Dr. Eddie Moody, the not secretary, director of the National Association of Free Will Baptists. I'm Thom Rainer. This is Jess Rainer. This has been a joy to have you on the Church Answers podcast. Stay tuned every week. We'll have something else for you. We'll see you later.